song for the Imps. Have a song for the Imps. There we go, then. Come on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good idea. Okay, yeah, all right. Come on, fellas. Get around the piano. Let's have a good go. Come on, then. Are you ready? Come on, you lot. Go on, then. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Radiants is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our...
Booyaka. That used to be what Ali G said, didn't it? Don't know what it means. It might be offensive in some way. If it is, my apologies. It's easy to be accidentally offensive these days, isn't it? Morning, Imps. How are we all doing? Hope everybody is well. It's the first morning in a while where the wind hasn't been so bad that I think that I can do an actual stream. And please do tell me if you can see me on the camera. We had an aborted live stream earlier this week, where I wasn't visible on camera. Some people would say that's probably a blessing. Whether that's you or not, I don't know. So please do. I've got a thumbs up. I'm assuming that means you can see me on the camera. If you can, wonderful. If you can't and you want to, that's a shame. But I am going to carry on for as long as my dog lets me, which might not be a very long while, considering that he's already about 100 yards ahead of me and I'm only about 300 yards from the house. It's a fine day up here in the Lincolnshire Wolds today. If you look over there, not sure how well you can see, there's the oilseed rape field, and the little bit kind of behind that is the North Sea. I would imagine it's cold. I would imagine it's very, very cold there today. Now, I've been perusing Twitter this morning, and there's an amusing little tweet going around that discusses kind of your or people's awards of the season. So there's player of the season, flop of the season, unsung hero, that sort of thing. And one of the sections that really fascinated me this morning is most improved player. Now, I always remember when I used to play for Rugby Boys, and it was only one season, but I used to then train them after that for quite a while. Well, my dad was manager. Most improved player to me always felt like a little bit of a slap in the chops, because it was basically saying, well, you were shit and now you're not as bad. You know, it was never something that you gave to one of the best players. They were in the running for player of the season. If you had two players in running for player of the season, you didn't give one of them most improved player, because the likelihood is he was really good at the beginning of the season, or she was really good at the beginning of the season, of course. So most improved player, I think, in amateur football or at grassroots football can you know, it's nice to get it, I think, but at the same time, it can feel like a bit of a slap in the face. So when I see most improved player on Lincoln City's kind of in respect to Lincoln City and in respect to supporters talking about our players, I sometimes think, oh, I don't want to put such and such, because that suggests that, you know, he was crap at some point. And I know it doesn't. I know that's probably just me. So what does most improved player mean? Well, it doesn't mean you were rubbish at the beginning of the season. Look, no matter what, I stand by what I'm going to say here. No professional footballer is rubbish. They're not. There are so few people make the professional ranks. Every single player that pulls on Lincoln City's jersey is a professional footballer at the moment. I'm not going to go back to when we were, you know, pulling in the likes of Gomez, Dali or whatever. They're professional footballers. They've reached a certain standard to enter their profession. In the context of the side, they don't perform, but none of them are rubbish footballers. So it's not about somebody who wasn't very good becoming good, because they've all reached a certain standard before they've gone on to get into the Lincoln City squad. So if it's not players who were poor and then getting better, it's obviously players in which you see some sort of major development. And I think that's where most improved player in a professional context is highly complimentary, because it's a footballer develops over time. If you're most improved player at 29, it's not so good. If you're most improved player at 23, it suggests you're on the right trajectory. And I think that that's important to consider. If your most improved player is, you know, somebody who's already had the best of his career behind him, something was wrong early in his career, unless it's a goalkeeper, of course. What interested me, I think, about this was about this week and these tweets was that there was a huge number of different players who could have been most improved player. And I think that that's really telling. And I put one player down, which I'll come to in a minute. And then within 30 seconds of pressing send, thought, it should have been them. And then afterwards, I'm thinking, well, I could have put an argument for them. And there are 3, 4, 5, 6 players who you would actually go, I think he's our most improved player this season. And that's got to be huge credit, has it not, to one, I think partly to the recruitment. And yeah, there was a little kind of Jez George mention on my unsung hero because we're praising certain players. We're praising Ben House for how he's done since he's come in. We're praising Dylan Duffy for coming out of Irish football at 20 years old and looking really comfortable. We're praising Ethan Arahan. We're praising Paudie O'Connor. All players that Jez was instrumental in bringing to the club. It's not just Jez. When we criticise him, I say that there's a whole team behind it. So when we praise, there's a recruitment team as well. But I'm a big, big believer in criticism where it's due. I am. Might not believe me, but I am. And I'm also a big, big believer in praise where it's due. And if we're going to be praising these players and we're going to be talking about players, almost all of which Jez has had a hand in bringing in, you've got to look to the recruitment and say, yeah, well done, well done. Not I was wrong or I was right. Recruitment's subjective. I get that. Some transfers work, some don't. That's how it is. I think if 60% of your transfers, loans and permanents, have an impact on the first team, then I think you've probably done your job. And I think if any fewer than that have an impact, or if a large portion don't have an impact, you probably failed. But there's a lot of reasons why players don't have an impact as well, beyond the fact that the recruitment's not right. But we've recruited well, in my opinion, over the past 12 months. We've brought in some players to the football club who have not just done well, who have been instrumental in getting us to, at present, 10th. If we finish 10th, that'd be unbelievable. And talk about most improved players, we've got to be most improved team from where pundits believed that we would finish, because not the top 20 had us finishing 24th. We're 10th. That's a 14-place swing. It's very, very hard to imagine any of their other predictions will have had a 14-place swing in an upward trajectory. Most improved team, Lincoln City. So who are the most improved players? I saw a shout for Paudie O'Connor. Harsh. I think somebody said he'd had a difficult start to the season. I'm not so sure. I think we had a difficult start to the season playing 4 at the back. I think it's easy to then point at one of the players who was a part of that and say he wasn't great. I think any new player takes 5-10 games to settle in as a bare minimum. It's very unlikely that you come in and have an instant impact. And some of the players that do have an instant impact when they go into a team then tend to fade a little bit as well. I think when you look at Charlie Austin, who's gone into Swindon, did really well and was left out of a matchday squad by Jody Morris. So I think that's harsh. If you're looking across the back in terms of most improved player, I think the first person that springs to mind is Sean Rowan. Sean Rowan couldn't get a kick under Michael Appleton last season. He was the only player brought off as we beat Bowers and Pitsea in the Cup. That was his only run out, his only senior run out, I think, for the team. He was loaned off to Drogheda. All the talk of Southampton and Chelsea 12 months before had faded away, and he got lost. And it was really after we lost 3-1 at home to Portsmouth in the playoff final season. I think he had a torrid time in the first half, and he just disappeared. He just disappeared completely. And I remember doing an article, we need to talk about Sean Rowan. I think Clive even messaged me about that, saying, well, look, you suggested he's dropped, he's actually been injured. But he had almost disappeared. At the beginning of this season, there was a hope, I think, that we might see something of Sean Rowan, but there was no guarantee. There was no thought of, he could be a key first team player for us. Right now, if we manage to keep him for next season, which I think he's out of contract, so there's a potential that he could go somewhere else for compensation. But if we manage to keep him, I'd happily have him as our left-sided centre-back. I think at left-back, there are certain limitations, but I think he's done really, really well at left-back. But in a 3, I think we probably need somebody more like a Harry Boyes. But Sean's stats stand up, by the way. But as a left-sided centre-half, I can see him absolutely excelling. And with him on the left side of Paudie and or him on the left side of Adam Jackson and Paudie, and potentially, Lewis Monsma will come back in eventually. TJ Omas to drop into that. It's exciting. But as a natural left-sided player at 20 years old, Sean Rowan's season has been excellent. I think he's a confidence player. I think once or twice we've seen him dip in confidence. Exeter, for instance, where, he was partially to blame for giving away the goal that levelled the game and swung the balance of the game entirely, I think. And you could see visibly afterwards he was affected by that. So I think there are obviously some elements of his game that that you expect him to work on. But he's 20 years old. He's a kid. He is. Do you know what I mean? He's a kid. No disrespect. And I think he's a child, well, not a child, but he's a kid who has played a full season of men's football and not looked out of place. And there have been games where, I watched one with Chris. I seem to think it might have been Ipswich, but I might be wrong. Where, do you know what? You were looking at him and he plays like a 25, 26, 27-year-old man in terms of his strength, in terms of his durability. And when the first game kicked off at the beginning of this season, we'd seen him in pre-season, but I don't think anybody would have said at that point, this lad could go on, and Southampton, for instance, are interested. I don't think anybody at that point would have said could quite easily get a move to Southampton at the end of this season. It felt like a lost season last season for him. He's come back. I think he's been excellent. He's a definite candidate. If there were a most improved player award for most improved player, no doubt about that at all. And also, I think that he probably gives some hope to Sam Long, because I think Sam has had the sort of season this season that Sean had last season. I know they were both on at Drogheda, but Sam came back from Drogheda on an absolute high. They were raving about him. He had played League One football for the Imps, and he's had a really tough season, I think, this season. The loan at Boston, I don't think particularly worked out. He wasn't even getting on the bench at Bromley. When he then did get his opportunity at Bromley, we've recalled him because of injury. He's just had a stinking season through no real fault of his own. So I think that he could look at this from Sean and think, it's salvageable. It's easily salvageable. Young footballers maybe need that time out of the limelight. Sean certainly looks like he did. Certainly a big candidate for most improved player. I think it'd be hard to pick anybody else out of the defence. I think it would be grossly unfair. I mean, Adam Jackson, has never been found wanting when he's fit, and to say most improved player because he's played a few more games this season than he will have done last season is probably unfair. And in a three, I think he's worked particularly well. But I think Adam Jackson's popularity now to how it was at the end of last season after stop-start 3 concussions through no fault of his own, but he's certainly, I think, got much higher standing with supporters now than perhaps a year ago. Doesn't mean he's the most improved player. Got to come on to, and Carl Mercer, morning pal, you've mentioned it, Les Sorensen without a doubt. Out of position earlier in the season, he still gave 100%. Now he's been using his preferred position. He's a revelation. Well, right wing back isn't his preferred position. He gave an interview the other week. This is out of position for him. He's a midfielder. I think he said he prefers to play an 8, so a more attacking midfield. Lars Sorensen's not even the most improved player this season. His improvement has been in 2023. I thought he started the season relatively well. He was kind of energetic in those early matches, certainly put himself about, against Exeter and teams like that. But at the same time, you always felt if we were going to go with a 2 in midfield, as in a 3-4-3 with 2 central midfielders, whilst Lars was a good option, I think we needed something a little more solid. He's a workhorse. He'll never stop running. He's got desire. He's got energy. He's got ambition. Is ambition the right word? Perhaps, he wants to get onto everything. At times a little naive. There was a goal early in the season where I can't remember who it was against. It might have been Fleetwood, where he's come running out. He's going to the ball. He's full of energy. He's full of, I want that ball. Mark Kennedy said if we hadn't come out for that ball, they probably don't get the cross in and probably don't score. He didn't blame Lars directly, but it wasn't on Lars solely, but it was part of a move that lost us points, but through eagerness, not through laziness, and that's the difference. He's always been eager. He's always been committed. He's always been a player that you can trust 100% to go out there and give everything he's got. His move to right wing back has been sensational. See, I noticed, first of all, the first time I noticed fans turning towards Lars, because I think he was one of the players that was booed on last season. There was a few. I think he was one of the ones that wasn't particularly well received by certain sections. It's a small section. No, Morgan Whittaker was another. But the first time I noticed the turn towards Lars seriously was away at Derby in February, when the fans were chanting his name, because to me, at my mind then, he'd always been, you want him in the squad, but energy, bring him on, last 20 minutes, chasing a game, 3 in midfield ideally, so that if he does kind of not lose his position, but if he does go chasing a ball and etc., there are still the 2 holding midfielders there. I think probably with Ethan Arahan, you could play Lars at central midfield, because Ethan, I think, is kind of the grounding. Similarly, I think Lars could have played alongside Liam Bridcut if Liam Bridcut was ever fit. But moving him to right wing back, I wasn't convinced. Shrewsbury away last season in the cup and in the league, he came on at right back, and it was not going to say a disaster, but it didn't work, and I thought he looked massively out of position. Was it MK Dons where he first played at right wing back this season? I remember seeing him on there, and I was just like, well, that's a disaster, isn't it? Lass in defence is not going to work at all. It's square pegs in round holes. And actually, we found the perfect position for him. And to be honest, looking back now, it may even have seemed a little bit obvious. Apologies for the jet going over there. It's an actual jet as well, probably going to Coningsby. Why is he a natural at right wing back? First of all, he only has to worry about half of the pitch. So in terms of, I'm not saying losing a man, because I don't want to make it look like we're making a weak player, because he's not a weak player. But you only have to worry about one side of the pitch, because the other side's the touchline. So in terms of positional awareness, you've got kind of half of what you've got when you're in central midfield. His energy is perfect for right wing back. It is absolutely perfect because he is high energy. He will get up and down that line all day long. And the game the other week, was it last Tuesday? Can't remember who we played now last Tuesday. Barnsley, I think, wasn't it? Late on, chance came, and he's 85 minutes, 89 minutes, and he's run the length of the pitch. He's beaten Luke Plange there, who, to be fair, had done 90 minutes as well. He's beaten Tashan there, who had done 0 minutes. I mean, he'd be on the pitch, but he had done 0 minutes, full of energy, perfect for that right wing back. Because if there's one area where players are likely to tire, it's on the wide areas of defence. Defenders that have had to be tracking a runner all the time, defenders that are now expected to get forward and attack. So if we've got somebody who will be willing to run into those spaces late on in the game, that's a real credit. And that's why right wing back suits. Also, let's be honest, Lass is technically very good when it works out. And I think we said on the podcast a few weeks ago that Lass is the opposite to what you expect a young European midfielder to be. You expect them to come here full of technical ability, but lacking perhaps in desire and heart. And for a while this season, it was the other way round. I think Lass was, full of desire, heart, fight, but technically it just didn't quite work for him. But the last couple of weeks, he's really got his eye in. And I'm thinking about the ball to Danny Mandroiu, which created a goal at Plymouth, for instance. I'm thinking about his goal at the other end of the field as we beat, I think it was Cheltenham. The games have come thick and fast. Sorry about this plane noise. What ball ache? I'm thinking about, obviously, his goal on Saturday as well. I mean, outstanding. He's a player that looks to me like he feeds on confidence. He feeds on being loved. He feeds on the supporters really buying into him. And he's looked like it. It's looked like it the last couple of weeks and months. So I'd definitely say Lasse Sorensen looks like one of our most improved players. And long may it continue. Now, do you know what? In a shorter period of time, and it wouldn't be over the course of the season, but I said Lasse looks like the most improved player of 2023. And this one's a little bit harsh. Harry Boyes. Where has he come from? I know it's Sheffield United before you get smart. But when Harry first came in, I thought that he looked a little lightweight. I thought that, we were still playing Sean Rowan. Harry Boyes felt a little bit like James Brown to me. And I don't know if you remember James Brown. He was a lad that came on loan from Millwall in the 2018-19 season, I believe, and never played. He was cover, Ricardo Calder, without the whole, domestic violence thing. That sort of player that came in, that was offering cover, but that ultimately, sorry, this is really muddy, ultimately wasn't going to significantly impact Lincoln City. That's how I felt about Harry Boyes. When we went to Sheffield Wednesday and the necessity was that we had to play him, I didn't expect a huge amount, which is why I was really surprised. Since then, he has been outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. And him and Lass have proven me wrong from the podcast. Oh, so filthy. Because on the podcast, I said, I expected us to want to buy. Sorry about that. Look, this is what I've just had to walk through. Nightmare. So on the podcast, I said I expected Lass and Harry Boyes to not be our full wing backs next season. Obviously, we don't own Harry Boyes, for instance. But then we needed 2 wing backs. Looking at them now, I'm thinking, do we? Do we need wing backs? I'm not so sure. Looking at us right now, the last couple of games, I actually struggle to see what we do need. And that's naivety on my part. We obviously need to reinforce. We obviously need to strengthen. There are key areas. But Harry Boyes' form over the last month, 2 months, month and a half has been excellent. Wouldn't be most improved player from the season. One, it would be grossly unfair on somebody who has progressed at a massive rate over the course of the season. And two, it would be unfair on Harry Boyes, who perhaps as a young player just needed a month or so to settle. And, were he signed in August instead, we'd now be in October, November. If he was turning in this sort of form now, you'd be talking about him going back to Sheffield United and staking a potential claim in and around their first team, I think. But he's certainly one to watch. I think he's one that we might try and get back next season, and I wouldn't be against it. So who else? Well, my pick for most improved player was Ben House. And I think that comes partly because he started this season in I think a lot of people's thinking as an attacking midfielder. I think he started this season certainly a long way from our starting number 9. And when I say that, I don't mean as in he was way behind Tom Hopper. I mean, Tom Hopper was, and that it feels like a long time ago, doesn't it? He was our captain. He was our number 9. He was going to start the games. If Ben House was counted as a striker and a number 9, he was definitely going to be on the bench. And if he was counted as an attacking midfielder, maybe so. If he was going to play in the 10, would he be behind Mandrieu? It was hard to see where we were going to fit Ben House in. Like Ben House, he's good on the ball. He's got nice feet. We hadn't seen a lot of him in front of goal. He had scored the 1 at Portsmouth going into the beginning of the season. Didn't score a shed load in pre-season, if any. There's a little deer over there. And if you can see the little deer down there, Country Far with Gary. It's very good. But I wasn't entirely sure where Ben House fits in. Even moving into the transfer window, I wasn't entirely sure where Ben House fitted in. The transfer window closed. You thought, well, that's it. Ben's our striker then. He's got to be, he's got to be back up to Tom. Tom got injured, and that was that. And that, that really was that. Tom got injured. Ben House came in, and all of a sudden we found the striker we wanted, we didn't know we had. Because for me, a striker that scores 13 goals from open play could be a 20-goal a season striker if he also took penalties. So you look at your 20-goal a season strikers and go, oh, we could do with one of them. If Ben House had taken all our penalties this season and missed 5% of them, I think that he would be closing in on 20 goals now. He's good in the box. He's got a nice finish. His goals are a mixture of popping up in the right place at the right time, away at Ipswich, for instance. Who was the free kick against it? Went down the side of the wall and he's put it in. Lovely goal. Might have been Derby. He's a worker. He grafts, he fights, he scraps. He's an irritant. My dog doesn't want to come back. He's an irritant to defenders. He's a Matt Reed, Jason Lee Thorpe style. Not as niggly, not as, dare I say, shithousey. But he's got that. He gets under players' skins. You can see him do it. He'll draw a red card or two out of a player. And I mean, obviously the Tom Conlon one, which has since been rescinded against Port Vale, Ben House involved. He didn't. We still don't know what particularly happened, whether he was, involved in getting the player sent off. If he was, and I'm not saying that you should try and get players sent off when it's incorrect. They will draw reactions from players. That's what he does. But it's his work rate, it's his work ethic, it's his understanding of the game, it's the runs he makes. He knows when to drop in behind, he knows when to come short. When he comes short, he plays sensible passes, he doesn't try and force an issue. All of this from a player that could have been our starting number 8 this season, or was certainly considered as an attacking midfielder in the early games. Ben House, we need to sign him, in my opinion, this summer to a longer contract. We need to promise him the number 9 shirt. First team football. If we sign a player, we've got to sign another striker. That next striker that we sign should be another project striker, or it's a Charlie Kendall, or do you know what I mean? It's somebody that we bring in and go, you'll get in off the bench. This is your foothold. Look at where Ben's going. When Ben goes, you're the long-term replacement. Learn from Ben. That's what we need to be looking for. He's suddenly integral to the team. Next season, Carl Rushworth won't be with us, but if we've got Paudie O'Connor, Ethan Arahan and Ben House as that kind of spine running straight through the centre of the team, we'll be all right. We'll be all right. Most improved player of the season, Ben House. So does anyone have any other ideas? Let me have a look through some of your comments. First of all, Adam says it's colder in the Wolds, walking my dog in a T-shirt by the Witham. Wow, well, I'm in a gilet and a hoodie. The wind's pretty cold, though, to be Adam, to be fair. Connor Pierce, morning Gary, morning mate. I hope you're all right. Carl, we've seen from last without a doubt, player that position. Forget that super goal. His work ethic is second to none. You're right. The goal brings him to people's attention on a wider level. His work ethic earned him the respect of the supporters long before that. I liked last season. I remember, I won't name him by name, but there's one of the main men at the Priory who I've delivered the content with for the last couple of years. We used to, last season, I was massively behind Lass. Good player in there, he's a good player in there. And he was, no, he's not good, yeah, he's awful. And I went away to Shrewsbury, came back and gone, I'm afraid you're right. First game of the season, I sent him a message, Lass is back, here we go. 10 games in, I'm not so sure. But what's kept him from that, from a player that's kind of drifted in and out of form to be what he is today, is his work ethic, it's his application, it's his personality. I think he's got the respect of the entire fan base. A couple of weeks ago, we said there's no player on this squad that we want to do better than Lasse Sorensen. He's the one that everybody wants to succeed. Everybody wants him to do well. We want all Lincoln City players to do well, but Lasse is the one that you just go, for him, not for us, for him. For him, if everybody is playing badly, the one player that you want to come off playing well is Lasse Sorensen. So delighted for him, and that's his work ethic, that's his attitude. So we've got a couple of people watching from many miles away. Mr. Winkworth is in Bilbao. So hello, my friend, how are you? Andrew Robinson is in sunny Turkey. Morning, mate. Everybody going on their holidays at the moment. And I think it will be a draw game from Tahar. I think that might be tonight's game with Burton, potentially. Won't put us past us winning it. Not at all. Anyway. Simon says, what's Lasse's contract situation? My understanding is that Lasse has another year. Usually when we say long-term contract, I take that to mean 3 years, or 2.5 years if they're signed in January. So I think that Lasse has another year on his contract. We shall see. Adam Frank, Harry Boyes is a better left wing back than Sean Rowan. I'd sign him permanently. He is, because Sean Rowan, in my opinion, is a centre back who can play left back. So his versatility will be important. Harry Boyes is an attacking left wing back, no doubt whatsoever. Sean Rowan, actually, in terms of long-term progression, operates in a position that probably 3 years ago or 4 years ago wasn't as prevalent. And that's that left centre back of a 3. So many teams play a 3 these days. And it's where I think TJ Ioma could see some benefit as well next season. Not as a right back, not as a right-sided centre back in a 2, but as a 3. Him and Sean, defenders that can get forward, that can carry the ball forward, that can help you progress upfield. Because if they stride out with it at their feet and move 10, 15, 20 yards out of defence, there's 2 defenders behind them, so they don't have to worry as much about being out of position. Everybody ahead of them advances at the same time. They're really important, in my opinion, in how we need to play against teams that are lower, the teams that are below us. And when we've gone and played the high block, Sunderland a couple of years ago when we won, or last season when we won 3-1, we let their defenders have the ball and made them pass, and they struggled. They couldn't get their midfielders and their creative players on the ball. If your creative players are either side of one solid, nasty centre back, it's a great way for you to be able to look to break opposition down, to get bodies forward. That's where I see Sean Rowan long term. Harry Boyes, the right wide wing backs, we've seen how important they can be on the counter attack. When you're playing, looking to try and break forward, spring at pace. Harry Boyes, Lasse Sorensen, energetic. They'll deliver balls into the box. Harry's got a great delivery on him as well, by the way. Some of his free kicks, crosses and corners of late, we've had some joy from corners because of good delivery. So yeah, if it was up to me, and it's not, I'd certainly be saying to Sheffield United, this boy's doing well with us. Can we have him for another season? I don't see him going into the Championship and affecting a Championship team. The only thing he might do is go to a bigger League One club. What we do know is it wouldn't be Sheffield Wednesday, mainly because they might go up. Daz Reed, already discussed him. Rowan has grown into a player this season. We have indeed, Daz, but you're spot on. And yeah, I really like Sean Rowan. I think he's a tremendous footballer with a big future. Jimmy Atkin, morning, mate. Kev Seal, nice to meet you the other week. Gav Hughes is watching from the big top. Poor old Gav does get quite a bit of stick. So they're my most improved players. I think, any other candidates, it would probably be unfair, but there are some young players who have got such big futures ahead of them. You know, Dylan Duffy's probably already written himself out of the most improved player for next season because he's already had such a good start. Sorry, I'm going back through the mud again. So he's already had such a good start. Dylan Duffy's a player who I'm pretty excited about for the future. But when you start talking about that, there are plenty of players at Lincoln City that I'm excited for the future. And at the top of this conversation, I started talking about most improved player. And I was saying that we were the most improved team because we went from a standing start. The Appleton era broke down. Last season was all very disappointing. We didn't have the spine of a team. You know, I'm talking about Ben House, Ethan Arahan, and Pordy O'Connor. Going into this season, you know, Pordy was new, Ethan Arahan was in St Mirren, and Ben House was being classed probably as a midfielder. The spine of the team probably wasn't there. Now it is. It's about finding the dressing to drip on the side. It's the Harry Boys, it's the Lasse Sorensen. It's who we can get to tuck in alongside House. And at the moment, you know, Mandrew and Duffy, if you named a team of Mandrew, Duffy and House up top, with Arahan in midfield and Boys and Sorensen out wide and Matty Virtue alongside Arahan and the three at the back, it's a strong, strong team. That's without the ball player Teddy Bishop, who, you know, in patches is a superb player. It's without Midi Shadipo. I know we've got him on loan. I wouldn't be against us bringing him in. I think that he's a player who can certainly help progressors. I think if you've got a selection of players kind of up top who you can bring in and rotate and mix around a little bit, you're in a good place. You wouldn't expect Dylan Duffy to play 46 games next season, but I'll tell you something, you'd want him to have 25 under his belt the way he's playing at the moment. 20 years old, physically strong. I remember saying something to, again, Chris a couple of months back about how well we'd played somewhere. I seem to think it was when we played against Ipswich again away. But we were talking about the players playing up top. They were all our players. They were all our players. Charles Vernham's to come into this. And Charles is going to find it difficult to force his way into the side. But there are players. I don't think there's such a reliance on loan players. You've got to sprinkle that team with loan players. You've got to. Even if a lone goalkeeper for me is a great shout. No disrespect to Sam and Jordan, but Carl Rushworth is top quality. If he's not played 40 championship games next season at this point, there will be something sadly wrong with the team that have loaned him, without a doubt. Alex Palmer was a great keeper for us. Josh Griffiths was a very good keeper for us. We've got Jordan Wright. I don't think he's going to be our number one next season. I absolutely don't. I can see Sam being loaned out. Again, I think he needs to get regular football. I can see Jordan playing the backup, playing in the cup games, and us bringing in another keeper. I really can. But other than that, where do you think we're going to bring loan players in? Possibly Harry Boys again. When you're talking about at least 2 loan players, if not 3, that we've currently got that we'd bring back in. Contrast that with 5 months ago. Matty Virtue was injured. We had the likes of Jack Diamond, Tashan Oakley-Booth. The loans felt like a flop. So much has changed over the last few games. It's important to keep our feet on the ground, though, isn't it? Older fans will remember the 1991-92 season where Steve Thompson's side won like 8 games or something at the end of the season. We went and beat Doncaster, I think 5-1. We beat Blackpool 2-0, costing them automatic promotion on the final game of the season. And everybody tipped us to go up the next season. It's not that easy. Everybody will change. The way that we're playing at the moment, teams are going to begin to look at it and they're going to think, right, we need to put somebody on that right wing back Sorensen when he breaks. We need to make sure we stop the keeper bowling it out quickly. For us, we need to get a keeper whose distribution is as sharp and on point as Carl Rushworth's. But while contrast, last season, Josh Griffiths holding onto the ball at the manager's request. Slow build up. Rushworth, he wants to get it out. That's Mark Kennedy. That's the coach. That's how we want to play now. Beginning of the season, Mark Kennedy said he wanted to get fans off their seat, excite them. Attacking football hasn't always been the case this season. But I think the final thing we've got to talk about, we talk about most improved player. We've got to talk about most improved head coach, haven't we? And again, that's not from a negative perspective. Mark Kennedy begun this season in layman's terms, in everyman terms, as a rookie. 40 years, 38 years, 35 years in the game, not a rookie. Coached at Manchester City, coached, I think, Wolves. Take the Macclesfield head coach out of that. been assistant at Birmingham, been around football for a long, long time. Not a rookie in football terms, but in terms of it being you, the head man, the focal point, doing the interviews, helping to sign the players, deciding on the patterns of play. He was a rookie. Why not the top 20 had as allocated, I think, as finishing 24th. It's why when I put it out to Stacey West readers, I would say 70% of people had us in the bottom 6 or 7. I did. Can't remember whether I had us just inside the bottom 4 or just outside the bottom 4. But it was the first time since we dropped out of the league that I thought we'd be near the relegation zone. Because I never really thought it in the National League, and I've certainly never thought it since we've come out. First time I was really worried. Because of what? Mark Kennedy's lack of experience as the focal point, potentially, yeah, I think so. There's elements around the squad. We've seen Mark Kennedy's improvement in the way that he wants to play. He's been open about it, speaking to a manager who we assume would be Mick McCarthy. If you play that way for the rest of the season, you'll go down after our first couple of games. The Bristol Rovers game, winning 6-3. We raved about scoring 6 goals. Mark Kennedy's first thing wasn't happy about the goals we conceded. We could have lost that game 7-6. He's right, we could. What did he do? Went to 3 at the back. People were critical of the 3 at the back. We went out against Chippenham. I seem to remember after we got beat against Chippenham, he's got to go was one person's post. Utterly absurd, of course. But I could understand the frustration. But then we're tight, we're hard to beat. And I respected that. Even I found it difficult after Cambridge at home. 0-0. A truly awful game. I remember coming away thinking, what is the pattern? What are we trying to do? But Mark knew. And I got called Captain Hindsight the other day because I made a jibe about Kennedy out. Aside from the Cambridge game, always said, you start by building the foundations, make yourself hard to beat, kick on from there. The relatively low XG that we have going forward was a concern. I'll admit that. But at every point, there seems to have been a little moment where we've stepped. So after Fleetwood and those sorts of games, we were scoring okay, but we were conceding. Bristol Rovers was where we went, right, now we're going to tighten up. We tightened up. We had a great December on the back of it. Let's not forget that. Going to Southampton, probably deserving something from Southampton, beating Bristol City. We had a good December. And then it came to January in the transfer window, and it became evident we were lacking going forward. And bear in mind, by the way, Mark Kennedy loses his assistant manager, so he loses his sounding post halfway through the season and has to bring another one in. He loses his head of performance, Ross Burberry, January, February. So there's been constant change and everything around him. And actually, we've now got to a point in the season where it's spring right now. You see all around me, it's beautiful weather. The wolds are glistening, and that's how it feels. It feels like we've come through the Mark Kennedy era. We've come through the dying off of Michael Appleton, the autumn of the Lincoln City era, and that's been happening through the course of the season. Players like Tom Hopper going. We've seen change in the way that we play, and I think Mark's felt his way in. I think it's telling when you listen to him now as well, isn't it, on the radio? You listen on wireless. At the beginning of the season, I thought at times he came across quite defensive. There was an interview after one of the friendlies with Rob where I remember listening to it and just thinking, oh, that's not going to go down well. And after even Chippenham, which was only November, I remember there was a comment about fans not knowing football or something. It had people incensed. But now when he comes out, and it's not just when we've won, by the way, he comes out much more confident. There was lots early in the season about this isn't my remit when it came to injuries and things like that. He talks now about staying in his lane. He's much more open, much more all-encompassing. He's a man who has slowly found his way into the top job. He's a man that, in my opinion, has gone from very much a coach mentality when he came in, as you would. He's been doing it 20 odd years or 15 years, to a head coach mentality, where everything is now my business, but I will empower the people whose section it is. So when he talks about injuries, I don't override my injury team. And I think it's really interesting. And I'd love to go and spend a day there. I did it with I spent some time there with Danny and Nicky, and I remember their approach to injuries. They had a traffic light system: red, green, amber. They might be able to play. They can do so many minutes. This has got to be their load. That's got to be their load. It was fascinating. Went in to see Michael Appleton. I remember sitting in his office, and he said, "Oh, there's this traffic light system. I don't want any of that. They can either play or they can't. Black and white, absolutely black and white." Which worked better? We certainly had far fewer injuries under Dan and Nick. Players were nursed through, but then the long-term effects on some of those players, for instance, the likes of Sam Habergan, probably weren't as great. However, now I'd love to go and see how Mark does it. I'd love to just sit for an hour or two with Mark. And I remember going through a board with players on with Michael, but with Mark I've not had the opportunity. I'd love to see how he's grown and how he's kind of evolved and how he now runs our football club. It'd be brilliant. Maybe I'll get a chance one day, who knows. But I think that what we've seen is the evolution of an exciting young coach. I genuinely think we have. I think we've seen a man who willingly took a step back when he was offered a role coaching, was at Ipswich Reserves, and he said, "No, I'll go down and do the under-13s or the under-15s," and started at the bottom and worked his way up. And I think this season he started with one plan. He's not afraid to deviate from it. He's not so stubborn that it's this way or no way. I respected that in Michael Appleton, but it didn't get him the success in the second season. It worked in the first, not in the second, and there were other reasons it worked in the first. Mark's open to change. Players change his mind. When a player plays well, he stays in the team. There's no favourites. You only have to see that with Sean Rowan playing well at left wing back. Harry Boyes didn't get a look in, even though we've brought him in. So I think in terms of when you talk about improvement and we talk about most improved player, well, not just most improved player, it's most improved team, most improved head coach. Got to be. You name me one head coach in this division who started with such a low stock in the eyes of so-called pundits and experts like me, like not the top 20, who talk about football and watch football all the time, to who now looks like being a top 10 League One head coach in his first season, despite losing his assistant, despite having a squad churn, despite, from what you can understand, probably having some players who came in the summer who didn't really fit the profile, being unable to recruit some of the players that he did want to fit the profile. So hats off to Mark Kennedy for that. And long, long may it continue. Because I tell you something, if we improve next season at the same rate we've improved this season, we'll be knocking on the door of the top 6. I don't expect that. But I didn't expect us to be knocking on the door of the top 10. If Sheffield Wednesday, Ipswich and Plymouth go up, potentially, Wigan, Blackpool and Reading come down, it'll be a weaker division. Okay, we may lose Morecambe, Cambridge, Accrington and Forest Green, and we may be replaced by teams who you would expect to be better, like Leyton Orient. Stevenage might come up. They'll be hard. They'll be like Gillingham one season. They'll go back down if they come up. Carlisle. But they're all on a par with the Port Vales and the Exeters. Second season syndrome will be tough for them. League One isn't good this season. I think it'll be weaker next season. If it's weaker and we're stronger and we're 10th now and teams find us hard to beat now, I just think it bodes well for the future. There's a lot of work to be done. There's players that are going to have to come in. There's players that are going to go. The team won't look the same, but it will look familiar. It will be Paudie O'Connor. It will be Ethan Around. You would imagine it will be Ben House. There will be legs from Lasse Sorensen. You would hope there'd be players like Sean Rowan, Adam Jackson, TJ Ioma, potentially Matty Virtue, Danny Mandroyu, Dylan Duffy. It'll look similar, but better. We're in a better position now than we were 12 months ago. 12 months ago, final game of the season against Crewe, if you'd said to me, you finish 10th next season, your top players will be your players, not loan players. And your head coach will have evolved and changed. You'll be playing 3 at the back. I would have taken that all day long. I would have said, bottle it up and inject it into my veins. And that's where we are right now. So Lincoln City fans, most improved player, it's up to you. Most improved head coach, absolute no-brainer at all. Enjoy the rest of your day. If you see me, Andrew Robinson said he might see me at the match on Saturday. If you see me on Saturday, I'll be in fancy dress with a trolley weight with 8 others at Morecambe on my stag weekend. Come and say hello. Other than that, have a great day up the ends.